Let's get... I think things are fine. We need this over here, though. It's been a while since we worked on Asteroids. Because of Rust Week and stuff. I guess it feels like it's been forever, but it's really just been like a week. So, current state of the program. Rotation is good. Shooting is good. Collisions are good. We're restricting the amount that you can fire a shot. Doing some despawning. If you hit the asteroid with the ship, your ship despawns. There's a little like gizmo-based little power thing in the back here. I don't know how easy that is to stream on stream. It's pretty small. But overall, pretty good. We need to split the asteroids today. Into multiple. And we'll see how far we get. I mean, that should generally be... I guess we should do some display for the amount of lives. I don't know. I don't know that doing lives counts is worth it for this. We'll figure it out later. Program is about 400 lines so far, so not too bad. We're using Avian 0.3, which means we get access to collision observers, which are really nice. So we've got background, zero gravity, because we're in space. We're using Avian, so we got to set that. Otherwise, everything's just going to fall to the bottom of the screen. We've got a lives resource. I don't think we're using it right now. We are doing a checked sub. And we are transitioning into game over. So theoretically... Oh, that's mip maps. Theoretically, this should work. If we run into the meteor 3 times, we shouldn't respawn again. 2, 3, 5. Okay, so we're... That's kind of a fun... One of the problems is that if you restart, it doesn't take everything else away, but the game does end. So we're doing, actually when we say lives 3, it's lives 4 really, because we're counting down to 0 with the checked sub, but I guess it's like additional lives, right? So probably we should do checked sub. I want to do an additional check here, but we don't have let chains yet or anything, so I'll leave that for a second. It's not the most important. I don't know why that didn't respawn the ship. That feels like we don't have our ship. Yeah, here's ship. We don't have state scoped on this. We do have state scoped on other things, right? So state scoped on game over. This changes its name in 0.17 to like despawn on enter state or something like that. Which is probably a better name for it. Where's ship? Ship. State scoped, game over. So that's all good. This is the little propulsion thing, just another gizmo. So we're using a bunch of gizmos here. We could go back and forth and do sprites or gizmos. I chose to do gizmos for this. We've got the physics debug plugins on right now. Should probably turn those off. So this is what it actually looks like when you're playing and don't have the physics debug stuff turned on. Our game over is just that one, like, hey, hit a new game. And we don't despawn anything on the screen, so you should be able to see everything on screen if you do get a game over. We aren't despawning any of the bullets off screen either, so we should do that at some point probably. We've got a start game. Start game doesn't really do anything interesting. We spawn the ship and we start the level at 1. The level controls how many asteroids spawn in. So we've got our app state, game over, startup, start game. What are we doing in startup? Startup is probably just the camera, right? Yeah, startup is just the camera at this point. Fixed update for any movement stuff. So linear movement, the wrapping movement around the edges of the canvas, the rotational movement of the ship, also the ability to fire. I think fire doesn't accept... Yeah, fire does check input. So maybe we should put this in update. Really, they should probably be separate. I think that the input... Well, we don't do input buffering or anything, so I think it's fine. It might just feel a little weird, depending. We're currently logging transitions, so when we see Asteroids app state transition game over to playing, this is built into Bevy. I've got 2 observers for spawning the level asteroids and spawning the ship. Spawn level asteroids is triggered on any spawn level. So overall, pretty good. The asteroids have sizes. We're using asset-based gizmos for the most part. We don't really use this yet. So this is where we would need to, as a to-do, split asteroid or despawn. That feels pretty okay. So this is going to be like a query for asteroids, right? Asteroid, because that's a component. And then trigger. What do we have for trigger? I'm kind of forgetting. Trigger dot. It's going to be trigger dot event dot. Body and collider. The entity of the rigid body that started colliding with the target. The target in this case is the asteroid. So that's the other thing, and we don't need the other thing. We want the collider. So we need dot collider. And we'll do asteroids.get. Typed something wrong here. There we go. Get rid of that paren. This is okay. This is a result. This isn't a option. Or maybe it is an option. Oh, right. Because what I didn't do is asteroids.get on the collider entity. And get is okay. So now we have asteroid. If we have an asteroid, then match the asteroid's size. we're only going to ever have a limited number. So it's either going to be 3, 2, or 1, right? 3, I guess we can do 2, 1. And if we wanted to, we could do this in a different order. Right? Or we could do underscore. But we could also just make this generic because the logic doesn't really matter all that much. So instead we could do asteroid size. I guess it does really matter, right? Unless we do... We have to have a max because we have to have something to subtract here. Because if we have a big one, we need to turn that into something. If we have a medium one, we need to turn that into something. If we have a small one, we need to despawn it. So realistically, the size could be like the number of asteroids inside of it or something fancy like that. But these are just numbers at the moment. And I think that maybe we change size to be something else. So we do like enum asteroid size. Small, medium, large. Hey, Dolce. How's it going? How's your morning going? Then we put asteroid size here. This is just drawing the circles, the sizes that we want them to be. So we could do like impl asteroid size, function radius. We take self and then we do a return of an F32. So now we can match on self. And this is like definitively a set number of stuff. So this is like 1, 2, and 3 for the actual sizes on screen. And then we'll probably need another function here, but we'll get to that in a second. This is going to be asteroid size large. This is going to be asteroid size dot radius. Size dot radius, which is a function. Hey, we're doing asteroids. We're doing asteroids. Right now, working on the asteroid collides and splits into multiple other asteroids functionality. Using avian, so we get to use observers with on collision start, which is very, very nice. And we've actually set up our collision layers in a way where we can just do dot observe on each of the entities or that we are trying to track. We could do this globally too. Probably should move this globally, actually, now that I think about it. But local is fine too. We won't have too many asteroids, so it's not really going to matter. And then we've got our asteroid size, and our asteroid size here then becomes like not some arbitrary integer, but things that we definitely know. Hey, Krads, how's it going? So we end up with small, medium, large, and we'll say this is number of asteroids to spawn. based on the size. We could put this directly on the asteroid size. So we could make this radius. This could be FN 2 fragments or something. Self, what I think we return a U32 here. So match self, fill, got small, medium, large. Small, if it gets hit, gives 0. Medium, if it gets hit, gives 2. Large, if it gets hit, gives, I don't know, let's do 4. 3 is probably reasonable. I forget what the actual Asteroids like game does. Was at a town-wide costume party on Saturday. Saw some ducklings with headphones. Nice. That's dope. Like real life ducklings with headphones on. Let's see. 2 fragments. We can always change this later, so it doesn't really matter. I think all we're going to do anyway is split this into a number of directions and send them all off into a different direction. People in duckling suits. Yeah, okay. That makes more sense. Costume party. I think our asteroid size doesn't implement clone. Yeah, so that doesn't. So this then is asteroid.size. I guess it could be on asteroid. Like it doesn't need to be on asteroid size. Right? Simple asteroid. I think that makes more sense. And then we get asteroid dot 2 fragments. And we have to count down from what it is. Because we got rid of the F-32, we have to do a match or something here. We could trick it, go back to like a U8 and then go back to the enum, but that's kind of weird too. I'd rather have an explicit function to do that. User says, does anybody use observers outside of UI stuff? Yes, observers. I use observers all the time. We're using observers right now, actually. Let's get num asteroids to spawn here. So this is hopefully going to work. We've got these bullets, and every time a bullet hits the asteroid, there's an observer that gets called on both of them. Same thing with the ship. All of these collisions are being handled via observers. So we've got the on collision start event. This will trigger on everything individually because I actually have not just this one, but also one on, I didn't label this. Also one on the bullets. Should put a label component on this. We don't really need one, but I don't know. It's not really a bullet, is it? Call it a shot. Throw this on here. I like to label things with marker components just for ease of reading the code, because it's like, what is this? It's obviously a shot. Would I increase the font size? Code? Like this? I don't think I can go much higher than that. But is that good for you? You use observers to implement custom relations in their bookkeeping. Yeah, that would make sense. I assume you're also using immutable components for that too, at this point, unless you're not on 0.16. Yeah, so we have observers for all of the collision events. We could have this as like a global on collision start observer. It's a bit of a trade-off, because if we use them locally, we kind of have to write similar logic over and over. But if we do like a global observer for on collision start, there's no way to filter this without doing an extra query. The extra query isn't a problem, just to be clear, but we'd end up with like a query for asteroids and a query for bullets and a query for ships. And then we would have to check to see if it matched any of those and then do different logic based on each of them. And if we're going to like fork off our logic there anyway, then it makes sense to just have them locally, because we just don't have enough observers for this to like matter in any kind of performance context. Can you trigger a collision with the mouse? The way that I'm thinking about that, the answer is I don't know if on collision start specifically will trigger, but you can definitely click on anything. You can definitely like do screen position for a click. You can definitely detect what's under it. You can definitely cast raise off the mouse click as well. You can definitely do a whole lot of things to make it so that you can click on things. There's also pointer support, I believe, or not pointer, sorry, picking support in Avium. So you can pick colliders. So you probably don't even need to deal with any of that, but it probably wouldn't be on collision start. I think it would be a picking event. So when you say trigger collision, if you mean specifically trigger on collision start, I don't know that you can do that, but you can definitely enable picking for colliders, which would let you click on any collider. You arrived where I default to observers and use events only when you need a queue and explicitly scheduled handling of them. Yes. I think that is where pretty much everybody is landing. Observers by default. If you need like some specific kind of scheduling in relation to all other systems, then event readers, event writers. Or if you need to do batching. Observers currently can't do batching. Cargo run. It looks like this isn't actually triggering. Hit asteroid. Asteroids.get. Do I not have an asteroid? I do have an asteroid here. Let me do a warn here for I think the thing that's confusing me right now is that we're using event.collider, which I thought was going to be the collider that we are. Oh no, collider is the entity of the collider that started colliding with the trigger target. and the body is the entity of the rigid body. Okay, so these two are both for the colliding entity, not the thing that we have the observer on. So really, we don't need trigger.event. We need trigger.target. And then this asteroid, when it gets hit, should be spawning 4 more asteroids. So in that case, we do commands dot entity trigger.target .despawn. And then the question is, we basically need this whole thing again for the new asteroids, right? Did I mess something up there? This doesn't exist, right? So mute commands. We unfortunately don't get, there we go. I just messed it up. So commands.entity. We could split this out into a different function. It might be worth doing, actually. I'll call this observe asteroid hit or collision, maybe. FN observe. Of course, the one time I need autocomplete from VS Code, it doesn't actually give me autocomplete. Let's get rid of some of the closure syntax here and get our parenthesis in. So it's a little bit more readable. And we now have this observer for it. So what we can do here then is we're basically going to have to do this again. This is just spawning level asteroids. Creates the gizmo, creates the asteroid size, creates the visualization of the gizmo, adds the gizmo asset, then goes in for the number of asteroids that we're supposed to be creating. So this is the level count. We are spawning each asteroid. So the question here is kind of, we have to spawn a bunch of asteroids. We have to do it from multiple places in our application. What is the way that we want to abstract that so that we can actually do that from multiple places? Because the one thing that I try to avoid doing in this case is just copying and pasting this code, which we can totally do, right? We could definitely take this, put it down here, say, okay, now we have another asteroid down here. But now you have 2 places that you have to maintain these lists of components for. And to me, or for the applications that I build and the way my brain works, I will absolutely forget to include a component. If I add it to one place, I will forget it in the other. That's me. So we have options. This is an observer. So we could create another observer, or we could create a custom command. 2 options. They're not terribly different. Isn't this the use case for required components? To some extent. I think that when you think about asteroid, right, it needs kinematic, it needs wrapping movement. It probably wants these collision layers and collision events enabled. All of those things are required components. But the transform is always going to be unique. The linear velocity is always going to be fairly unique. The collider circle needs to be specified per entity. And the gizmo needs to be a different per level of asteroid, right? So to some extent, yes. This is the job of required components. But not in all capacities. So we could start with that though. So asteroid here then, we'll want these, this, and this. These are all required components, right? Where is that? That goes here. Hash require. I think we can just drop all of these in. Why is wrapping movement giving me an issue? Let's take a look at the syntax quickly. If I have a Chrome window, Bevy, component, require. So we've got like a require B. These are usually types, but you can also specify values like this, which is what I'm trying to do. Looks like I got my syntax correct. Sorry for the 50 bajillion window movement. I'll try to move this all the way back over here. So, interesting question as to why wrapping movement is not satisfied. Oh, it doesn't implement default. Interesting that it doesn't implement default. It is just a unit struct. So you could argue one way or the other whether this should automatically implement default. I think that I'm on the side of not implementing default by default. Because if you ever change this to have a different behavior where it can no longer implement default, if you ever add a field or something, then you have like a bound in a different case where it is accepting default and just happened to work, but doesn't actually work that way. So just checking to make sure that this still works. Is not handling the collider here. So we should have kinematic, wrapping movement, collision layers, collision events enabled. Where's our asteroid? Here's our asteroid. This is supposed to be our collider. Kind of awkward that that doesn't work anymore. Not really sure why, honestly. Could be an ordering issue. I'm just gonna test this quickly. So we can do asteroid.clone here and do radius afterwards. Now it works. So it's an ordering issue here. I don't like that. Here, just to confirm, putting collider above asteroid results in no collision. Putting collider below asteroid works. I don't love that, if I'm being honest. I don't have the answer for why that happens. We might be able to get to the bottom of it, but it's definitely not like a this stream topic, if that makes sense. This feels like a bug in general, more than anything else. And the place that I would start looking for it is basically the interaction of what happens when you add colliders and rigid bodies in different orders with Avian with respect to the required components that they have. Is asteroid.clone a derived clone? What do you mean? Asteroid does derive clone. The reason this has clone on it It doesn't need it, right? The reason it has clone on it is because we're using asteroid size later. So the reason I had collider circle above it is because if we are accessing size as a shared reference and we're grabbing the radius and returning a different number, there's no reason for us to clone asteroid. And then we can use asteroid and move it later. If we do the collider circle after asteroid and we're trying to move asteroid here, then we don't have asteroid later. So that's just kind of how that works. But this doesn't give us the behavior we want when we use required components. Have I been streaming this project from the very beginning? Yes, I have. It should be like the last 1 or 2 streams of this title stream. I should probably go back and label them. But it'll be the same stream title that you see right now, which is like Bevy educational stream or something. It'll be the last 2 iterations of that are asteroids, or the last 1 or 2. I don't know how many. So introducing required components introduces some additional complexity. I tend to believe that this is a bug. This feels like a really weird behavior. Because we're saying that when we insert asteroid, right? Asteroid brings kinematic rigid body, wrapping movement, collision layers, collision events enabled. We could say that it also requires a collider. The only downside of doing that is that we have to specify this collider anyway. Like the collider is based on the size of the asteroid, and I don't think we get access to any of that data, which I think is one of the drawbacks of required components, actually. Let's see if I'm mistaken. I don't think I am. Cycles in the component required tree will result in stack overflows, of course. You can register at runtime. I don't think you can get access to the underlying value of the component that you're being required on. So it's kind of like this is why we're not using required components, more or less. Because while it feels like it should work, and there's definitely like a set of things that together make up an asteroid and the functionality of an asteroid, right? So it feels like there are definitely things, especially for the current implementation, that should be required components. These things should be required components. They always have to be these values, right? But there's also things that we need to initialize based on some other values, right? Where it exists is something that we are always going to have to insert, right? How big the asteroid is always going to come from like that asteroid size. So we need to access that value somehow, which we can't do. The linear velocity is always going to come from like how fast and in which direction was the asteroid moving when it was destroyed, right? And the gizmo itself is always going to be based on this asteroid size. So while required components are cool, I think that especially since it seems to be showing a bug at the moment, we are not going to use them. Or rather, we are using them because Avian uses them, right? But I think that we're not going to rely on them for our application level functionality. You were just thinking about a visualizer for asteroids that shows how the screen maps to a torus. It'd be fairly easy to render the running game to a texture and have a 3D camera render that to the screen. Yeah, if you can like UV map your torus. I don't know how you UV map a torus, but sure. Well, I guess a torus just the donut, right? Sorry, I was thinking of a what's the other one that's like a Mobius strip is what I was thinking of. Yeah, you should be able to 2D render to a texture and use that texture to apply to the torus. And you should be able to like, I don't know, what are you going to rotate the torus as the player moves? That'd be funny. Seems possible though. Is it possible that the collider is not moving with the asteroid? We can definitely check. We can definitely turn physics debug back on. We can go up here. We can definitely do physics debug. Somebody was asking for this earlier anyway. So new game. You can see that the collider is moving with the asteroid. It just is not detecting any collisions. So I don't know. Like I said, this seems like a bug to me more than anything else, because from the way that required components are described and the way that I feel like they should behave, this feels like buggy behavior. To me anyway. Oh, side question out of nowhere is totally cool. That's part of what the stream is for, especially this stream in particular. This is supposed to be like, we're building simple games so that people can be like, oh, why doesn't this work? What do we do here? That's part of the reason I'm exploring required components on screen right now, is because somebody had a question and I just want to show what happens, like what the trade-offs are, where the points hit for the design. Do bullets have colliders? Yes. Just to be clear, the issue is not that collision isn't working. The issue is that collision for the asteroid doesn't work when we move a specific set of components to being required components of the asteroid component. If we put everything in regularly, everything works. If we move a set of those components to a required component on the asteroid component, then things get a little funky. And I'm not really sure why. But I get the feeling that that's either some kind of required components bug, or like a weird behavior that is hard to understand if you don't dive deep into the required components resolution algorithm. Those are my guesses currently. We could definitely track like all of the components that are getting added to this entity, log them all out. What changed? How did it change? Where did it come from? Like we have track caller and stuff. We could go figure that out. That's just not, that's a little too deep for this stream. Any reason not to use bundles for the asteroids? We could use bundles. um, Technically, we are using bundles because any tuple of components is a bundle implicitly. The implementation already exists for it. So I guess the question is, why is there any reason to not use a named bundle? I just don't think the overhead is that useful. The ecosystem at large, led by Upstream, so led by Bevy, kind of deprecated all of their bundles and moved to required components. So today, if you see a bundle in a third-party crate, many people think that that's like a dead concept, if that makes sense. So if you want your crate or your library to feel like it's up to date with Bevy 16, there are many people who view using bundles as like a deprecated concept. To be clear, they are not. Like, bundles are useful and will exist and are required for a whole bunch of things. Like, the concept of a bundle isn't going anywhere. For this particular situation, I don't really see a lot of value in using a bundle. I think that we definitely could, right? And then the ones that we were just looking at would all get their default implementations. And the ones that we need to fill out would still be there, and we would need to fill them out. We could also do a like a constructor function to pass in like only the components that we expect people to set for the most part. But the other thing about them is that if we extract this out into a bundle, then we also actually need to set this observer. And a bundle doesn't really help us do that by itself. What was the reason to quote unquote deprecate bundles? There was the introduction of the required components feature is intended to support future efforts like BSN much more in depth. So bundles were a little bit weird in the sense that like bundles don't exist at runtime, more or less. So if you use a bundle to insert a set of components, you can't then query like for that bundle. You can only query for the individual components or like a set of components. So conceptually, they were a little bit weird. There was nothing inherently wrong with them from like, here's a set of stuff that we expect you to insert together perspective. They weren't like broken in that capacity. If you used them, they did things like, if you had inserted a set of components previously, and then you wanted to insert a bundle on top of that, the bundle would overwrite every component in the bundle on that entity. That is not true for required components. So if you have a required component and you've previously inserted a whole bunch of components, maybe like a transform and stuff like that on your entity, and the component that you want to insert requires a transform, then when you insert that other component onto the entity that already has a transform, it won't get overridden unless you insert a transform yourself. So there are benefits to required components that don't exist with bundles. You don't have to use bundles even if they exist. You can insert things piecemeal, which does the same thing. But yeah. Yeah, thanks. No wonder you've been puzzled where the PBR bundle is hiding these days. Yeah, PBR bundle's gone. That's like Mesh 3D and Mesh Material 3D these days. Yeah. Yeah, so like inherently nothing really wrong with bundles. They still work. And like the bundle trait still exists. The bundle trait didn't go anywhere. But in an effort to be like, how do we say this? Like Bevy to some extent needs to lead by example, right? So if you have, let's say, 3 ways to do things, right? and you want one to be the dominant way, even though others work, then like Bevy upstream needs to like choose that one and commit to it. So that's what Bevy did. Bevy took all of their built-in bundles, like PBR bundle and stuff like that, and partially as like an integration test, moved everything to required components so that they knew it would all be ready when it actually went out to everybody else in the wider ecosystem. That required components are here, they're ready, the core engine is using them, you should go use them, like that kind of thing. But like the concept of a bundle didn't go anywhere. Just the specific bundles that were in upstream. So that gives us some options. We can either do a custom command, or we can do another observer. Both are valid. Both are effectively the same thing. Really, it's a question of, do I want to introduce the concept of a custom command, or do I want to continue using observers in this workshop? The general rule you follow is always putting the more specific components, like Asteroid here, first, so that its required components are prioritized over general library components. They're prioritized. I don't think that's how it works. I would have to look at the implementation. My understanding of the documentation for the resolution algorithm is that the resolution algorithm will run for everything. But maybe that is a mistake. Maybe that's only for a specific component. Yeah, there's this like concept of like a component required tree. You can have multiple required components that then also require like transform in multiple different places. So you can effectively end up with like multiple requires for a transform, or in this case, it's multiple requires for an X. Which one of these two wins is supposed to be well defined. The algorithm for choosing the constructor from the tree is simple and predictable. A constructor from a direct require, if one exists, is selected with priority. So if there is a require and it is the top level, I suppose, like if it's on the component that you're inserting, then that one is used. Otherwise, it depth first searches the tree of requirements to select the first one found. I think that doesn't cover if you're inserting multiple components at the same time. So the suggestions here are, I think number 2 is what you just said, but I'm going to read them in order anyway. Specifying required component. I wish we didn't use foo. Specifying a component when you're spawning a component, a required component when you're spawning another component, will result in the constructor that you specified being used, and overriding any other constructor lower in the inheritance tree, which is pretty straightforward. If you specify it directly, it wins. When there are multiple inheritance, so transform at multiple levels deep in the tree, for example, components should be listed in importance order, is what they're saying. List a component earlier in the requirement list to initialize its inheritance tree earlier. So there definitely is some ordering here. So if we look at what we had, I still think that I'm not going to use it here because it feels weird to start talking about like the order that you put in these components affects whether your collider will work or not. So kinematic, right? Collision layers, collision events enabled. None of these really have colliding requires for the most part. Kinematic, definitely the most important. The thing that collides, let's see, collision layers here. We don't have any required components. See, collision events enabled. Doesn't have required components. Rigid body requires a whole bunch of stuff, but not collider. Especially linear velocity, angular velocity. And collider requires marker AABB collision layers, interestingly, density and mass properties. So let's take all of these. I'm deciding whether I want to experiment with this right now or not. I think that I've already decided that because this ordering can result in buggy behavior, that I don't want to include it in the workshop. Because introducing people to required components and then being like, oh, and by the way, this is a little bit weird. We just don't need to do that. We can skip the whole thing, right? We don't need to use required components here. So I think we're just going to leave it. I bet you it's collision layers, though. We're going to try it. We're going to try this. I bet you it's collision layers. Where's our asteroid? Here's our asteroid. Yep. It's collision layers. Because if we move this up here, this is going to be the issue. My curiosity got the better of me. I said I wasn't going to do it, and then I did it. Yep. It's literally collision layers. And we can figure that out by looking at the required chain. Because, what was it? Rigid body doesn't require collision layers. Asteroid requires collision layers. And collider requires collision layers. So, very weird that collision layers in this ordering would come from collider. But I guess if you think about that logically, and you say that things earlier in the list will beat things later in the list, then that makes sense. It just feels really awkward. I don't know. This is the thing that makes me... This is the thing I spend a bunch of time in these workshops on. Basically, like, I know that this ordering exists. If this ordering was a bug, which I no longer believe it to be a bug, I think it's intentional. Then I would try to skip it because bugs are things that I try to avoid in workshops. I think that debugging this is really weird. And creating this collider forces you to deal with Rust's borrowing in a way that doesn't feel super relevant. So we've got required components requiring an order and Rust's ownership rules requiring an order, which is just in general kind of awkward. So we like end up doing something like this, right? But now this component is just like defined in floating space out here, which is feels weird. This should all work though. Yeah, this all works. Wouldn't adding the asteroid component first like it's a marker make sense anyways? I think that that's totally reasonable. As a general rule to follow, like should I put the thing that this is first? Yeah, probably. Is it surprising that it is kind of required to be first? Maybe a little bit, depending. Maybe that's too much of my like past Bevy experience, my like pre-required components experience speaking to that. Because I've been using Bevy for 11, 12, 13 versions or something at this point. So I've got a lot of like pent up history. Whereas somebody coming to it right now, it might be more natural for them to put that first. I think that in the past, I haven't thought of that ordering as important, but the ordering is actually important. To be fair, you were following that rule even before required components, so you luckily didn't encounter that problem, but you agree it's a pitfall. Yeah, I don't know if it's a pitfall. I think for it to be a pitfall, I would have to come up with a valid use case to do things in certain orders that didn't work for. Right? I think that what it is right now is an attempt at defining some kind of specificity. And I can get behind, like, having a specificity. I think that's fine. I don't think that's a bug. I don't think that that's like, does this have an ordering or not? Yeah, technically. You know, like it feels on one sense that you're inserting this whole thing at the same time. But really what's happening under the hood is these components aren't all getting inserted at the same time. So like something has to happen first, you know? Yeah. This makes me feel better about the decision I made in Skeen though. In Skeen, I decided to represent, the list of components as an array. And I think that this makes me feel better about defining it as an array because the order does matter. You didn't even know this was a thing. You consider that weird and it might not be a bug, but it definitely can cause some. Yeah, it definitely just did cause one, right? It definitely just did cause the collider for the asteroid to just like silently not work effectively. And the reason it didn't work, as far as I can tell, is because collision layers got inserted with like a default value instead of the value we wanted it to have. The more specific value, if you will. I think it's a little surprising because giving a value here feels like it should override. Wow, I scrolled into a weird area, didn't I? Feels like it should override a require with a default value, right? Or a require with no specified value. But I think the other thing to keep in mind in here is that required components on separate components in the root bundle that you're inserting don't resolve against each other. Those are totally ordered. So in a single components require tree, things resolve like that. But if you're looking at the actual set of components that you're inserting, they are totally ordered. So, I mean, it is what it is. I don't think it's a bug. I do think it's something worth explaining. So I've gone back and forth a little bit in the stream about whether I would want to include the required components or not. And I think that because the ordering is important, that is something that is very valuable to teach. Right. And in this case, I could even go through this process in the video and be like, hey, if we don't do this, you can end up with a value in like a transitive component, so to speak, being not what you thought it was going to be. So be aware of that. I think that's very valuable to call out in the workshop. Whereas before I was kind of like, is this a bug? It feels a little buggy. And if it was a bug, then I wouldn't have included it. Darksider is getting the notification an hour later. Yeah, I don't control when you get notifications, unfortunately. I do think that YouTube doles them out like that. I know that there's kind of like a kick up over time, like a start the stream. After a little bit, a bunch of notifications will go out, and then like an hour later, a bunch of more notifications will go out. I try to schedule them ahead of time so that you know they exist. Sometimes I schedule them the night before, but I try to schedule them ahead of time. The one on Saturday I'll schedule probably like later today. So you can always click notify if you want to get stream notifications. Yeah, that all said, so we still are left with this, right? And we can't do a couple of these things in required components anyway. So we still have to make a choice. Gizmo assets, right? We can't access resources or the assets database for a resource type. Can't do that in a required component. So this gizmo is never going to be in a required component for us. The collider needs to get the value from the asteroid size, which we also can't do in a required component. Linear velocity is always going to be separate. We could put this in a required component, just have a default. I don't know. At this point, I'm like 50-50 on whether these things should be in required components. Because like technically linear velocity and transform could be, right? We could put those up here. They'll get their default values if we put them up here. We also need to kind of insert them like this. So like it doesn't help us to have those required components there. But nothing breaks if we have them there. Yeah, it spawned on the ship because it's at 0, 0, 0. So maybe we set the default to something. But I don't know. I guess they're technically, like, are they required? Not really. Asteroids don't have to move, you know? Having a transform is probably useful to have required. But I guess it's like API design choices, right? Technically, yes, it should have a linear velocity, but is it required for it to have a linear velocity? No, not really. In any case, we're basically going to always be setting these anyway. So between that and the observer, we have two options. We can either do the custom command for spawning asteroids, or we can do an observer. Either way, we kind of need to do the same thing. I think an observer might be nice. We've already talked a lot about observers. I'm just 50-50. I think this is a beginner workshop. So teaching custom commands is super useful, but it also kind of is more advanced. Observers feel like less advanced. So let's say like spawn asteroid, right? This is a trigger. And this trigger will be some kind of event. So spawn asteroid is going to have to take some arguments. This is going to be an event. We're going to want to give it a linear velocity. And a transform. Right? And then do we need anything else? I don't think so. Just the asteroid, right? So we get spawn asteroid with an asteroid, a linear velocity, and a transform. And then the collider is built out of that data. And we have to add the observer. So we'll take all of this stuff. All of this. All of this. Is going to be a single spawn. Here and here. We can also write the custom command version if people are interested and compare the two. That's totally viable. I don't know how familiar people are in chat with writing custom commands. Spawn asteroid is going to be a top level observer. If I can spell. So now all of these don't need to be here, right? This doesn't need to be here. This doesn't need to be here. Hey, Trent, how's it going? We need to create that asteroid, though. There's the asteroid. This, this, this. Get rid of this. Get rid of these. And we're going to commands.trigger spawn asteroid, I think it was what we called it. We'll take this and we'll take this. And we'll shove this here. You would love to see it because you're still not clear on what a custom command buys you. Yeah, we can totally do that. I'll do the observers version, and then I'll do the custom command. The TLDR is it buys you world access. So in this case, we're spawning a new level, right? We're spawning the asteroids for a level. We're looping over the level number, and we're saying spawn an asteroid for each of those. We would need to, in the future, change this transform, right? And maybe the linear velocity. So, like, to do vary, transform, and linvel, right? Because the more asteroids we have, the more places we have to put them, the more directions we want to send them in. So we get spawn asteroid here. We don't have this anymore. This is now trigger.asteroid. We have to clone this out of the event. We don't, strictly speaking, need to, I don't think. We could set it up in a different way, but cloning is fine. And then we end up with linear velocity and transform, which both come from the event as well. One of the things I go back and forth on is like, how confusing is it to read this? Like trigger.asteroid.clone? Because if you try to auto-complete this, you're kind of like, okay, well, I get trigger and then asteroid and linear velocity. And then like, what happens if I ever have a function that like competes with any of these, you know? So one thing we could do here is trigger.event. And then the event is quite literally just those fields. It's a little bit more verbose, but I think it's significantly more clear. So this should work. There's an asteroid. Ta-da! Could you do a quick rundown of what a gizmo is? I think I know, I'm just not sure when to reach for one for your own projects. Gizmos in general, so everything on screen for asteroids right now, the little bullets that are traveling the ship and the asteroid itself are all gizmos at the moment. Gizmos are effectively, they're not wireframes, but they're like debug UI like assets, right? There are two ways that you can render a gizmo on the screen. One way is like an immediate mode and one way is not. The immediate mode is basically every frame in some system you would call gizmo.2D circle or whatever, a circle 2D I think it is. And wherever you want to render that, you can. So if you look at the gizmo, where's our functions? Gizmos, that's what we want. So you grab the gizmo system parameter, right? That gives you access to a bunch of these functions. These functions give you a bunch of different like things that you could draw. So if you wanted to do some debug UI for which way your character was facing, or a raycast that your character was doing, or a maybe you were trying to generate something in a bunch of different places and you know that they're going to be vaguely cube shaped, right? And you're working in 3D. All of those kinds of things are like valid gizmo uses. For the most part, I would say use them for debug UI, We are using them for game like assets, like the ship and the asteroid and whatever right now. But for the most part, those are arbitrary drawings for development use cases, is what I would say they are. Technically, you can use them for anything. So there's immediate gizmos, which you have to render every frame. So if your system runs an update and you call gizmos.arrow2D, you will draw an arrow from one transform to another in 2D, and it will render as an arrow. You don't have to do anything else. You just have to say gizmos.arrow2D, start, and give it a color, and it'll draw an arrow for you. There's also asset-based gizmos, which is a lot of what we're using in the game currently, which are more performant. Yeah, you did understand. You were just a little confused seeing it here. What was confusing about it? Was it just that the like using them for gameplay elements was confusing? It's a little annoying that using this debug tool is the only way, as far as I can tell, to draw lines and curves. Are there by any chance plans to add a non-debug way to draw this stuff? Yeah, I refer to it as a debug way to do things because the original implementation was as like a debug tool. The growing future of gizmos in general is that gizmos have expanded from being, hey, draw this circle on the screen at this point, to being like fully asset based. So it wouldn't surprise me if gizmos grew even more in the future, right? There's nothing stopping you from using them for gameplay use, right? Like here, we're using them for the ship, we're using them for the bullets, we're using them for the asteroids. If they work for the aesthetic that you're going for, if they work for, you know, the performance needs of your application, etc., you can totally just use them for whatever you want to use them for. I mostly consider them a debug tool because when I'm going to go build like a 3D game, for example, I'm probably not going to use a gizmo to do, you know, visual rendering, right? If I'm going to draw a line between two things in a 3D application, it's probably going to be like chain lightning. You know, it's not going to be a single white line. And if you're doing like chain lightning or something, you're doing like billboards or something like that, you know, like 2D or like orientated 2D meshes between 2 points, not individual lines. Yeah, it just looked like they were being used for assets, and you thought those were debug things. Yes, they are assets. So there's two different styles of rendering gizmos, right? And in this case, as of 0.16, you can create assets from gizmos and use those to render. And that is a significant performance improvement over recreating them every frame. There's valid reasons to use either one. If you have a ton of very stable gizmos, probably create them as assets. If you want to attach them as like components to things, probably assets. If you want to temporarily render the position of something and you just have some data, but you don't have like an entity to attach it to, then you can use a gizmo to render that data, right? If all you have is like point A, point B, and that's all you have, you don't have an entity associated with those things or anything like that, and you want to draw a line between those 2 points, a gizmo that is immediate is a great way to do that. But yeah, I forget. I don't know what we describe gizmos as currently. But the like semi-confusion around what are gizmos for is partially because they were originally for very limited use cases. And then they got less immediate over time. So they went from being needed to called every frame to being able to be called in fixed update. And they went from be able to call it in fixed update to being like fully asset driven as well. So like they're just becoming more and more useful. So it's worth noting that. The other thing is that you can do a whole like, these are all of the gizmos for my stuff or my crate. And you can let people turn those gizmos on and off. So like Avian ships with a bunch of gizmos, right? Those are the physics debug plugins that we keep looking at. Okay, yeah, so we have the observer. This is straightforward. We already have observers. Observers trigger based on events. We do commands.trigger. In this case, for spawning a new level, we trigger the spawn asteroid a bunch of times, ideally with like varying velocity and transforms and stuff. Because observers are recursive, these immediately run, and we spawn as many of them as we want. And now all of our spawning logic is encapsulated inside of this observer function, rather than kind of just being scattered in different places. Now, the alternative, if we, I guess, comment this out, right? And we don't have this, and then spawn asteroid, right? Here's spawn asteroid, and we get rid of that. Now we're not going to have any asteroids spawning. Right? No asteroids. The other option is a custom command. So I'll just do this right here. We're going to impl command for spawn asteroid. Should probably put this below spawn asteroid. We don't need event on it anymore, because this is no longer going to be an event. But you're going to see a very deep parallel here. So this is a custom command. And the way that we call a custom command is, instead of triggering, we are going to do commands.q. And we're going to queue the spawn asteroid command. So it's the same struct we were using. Before it was an event. Now it's just a command that we're implementing command for. And now we put our logic here, right? So we go down, maybe in here, and grab all of our relevant stuff, and we stick it in here, and we uncomment it. And now we have a bunch of places that we need to change some stuff. So we do self dot whatever instead of trigger. We're gonna get rid of this little event here because it's not an event. And then most of this stuff is already fine. We have access to worlds, so we need to do world.commands if we're gonna spawn something like this. Gizmo assets has to come from somewhere. So what is Gizmo assets? Gizmo assets is res mute assets Gizmo asset, right? So let's grab this. And let's say right here, we've got let Gizmo assets equal world.get resource mute. And this is going to take the type argument. And then we have to unwrap here, or we can, handle that error however we want. In this case, we're unwrapping. And then we have the handle, and this is a custom command. And we're triggering it in much the same way. And now we have asteroid spawning. So the big difference here is, with a custom command, we can see a parallel between the event and the command that we wanted. You can pass in these structs to either of them. If you have the observer-driven approach, you can layer it in with a whole bunch of other stuff. If it's a command, then you also can layer it in with a whole bunch of other stuff. Like, it's still going to work. Both of them queue effectively into the next, like, apply deferred. The thing that you get from creating a custom command is that you don't need to register the global observer. This thing doesn't need to be an event anymore. And you get world access, like mutable world access. The benefits of doing this with an observer are you get to write it like it's a regular system, right? The way you write everything else is the same way you would write the observer. So this can be useful. Now you can commands.q this from anywhere, but you could also commands.trigger the spawn observer from anywhere. So they're very, 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 very similar, minus the fact that one gives you exclusive access to the world by default, and you have to do things in a slightly different way, right? If we did more world access here, we have to manage our access to that world ourselves, potentially using things like system params and whatever, or system state. Sorry. Let's see if I can show that. Yada, yada, yada. So this is system state. Basically, if you're in a custom command, right, and you want to, let me make this a little bigger. If you're in a custom command and you have world access, right, you have mutable world, which is this, you can create a new system state with all of the things that you expected from that query, from your observer, from the arguments, from the systems that you're writing, whatever. This happens to be an event reader or event writer, some resource, and a query, right? So you get that system state, you create this system state, and then the way you use this is you use that system state to get mute on that world that you have, and you just get all of those things as if you just called a system. So this can be really useful if you want to do like a whole bunch of stuff like that in a row, right? You can do a whole bunch of system state stuff, do some work with it, grab a different system state from the world, do a bunch of work with it, drop it, and and just do that repeatedly, right? Custom commands are very cool. System state is very cool. The big difference is you have to know how to work with world rather than knowing how to work with the observer stuff. The big difference here in terms of the different kinds of world access that you have is observers have deferred worlds, and actually, I think that's true. Observers have deferred worlds. Hooks definitely have deferred worlds. Observers have deferred worlds, and commands have just like mutable access to the world directly, right? So if you have a custom command, you can just arbitrarily mutate things inside of the world, and that will apply. If you have an observer, those things kind of have to go through, like, you can't do structural changes, if that makes sense. For a lot of people, though, these are the exact same thing, right? Like we just showed. So it's a little bit up in the air whether this is worth doing at the basic level. But it's two different ways to kind of abstract complicated spawning logic into some place that can then be reused. You can also just like throw a function together, but like that tends to not work out as well. I assume that once we get constructs and stuff, this will get a little bit easier too. So let's just keep using the command. Why not? Instead of the observer. Right. And it's basically all the same code. You just, like, working directly with a world is a little bit different than working with system. Observers don't parallelize. You're looking for a param set, I think, Xavier? Is that still what we're calling it? Yeah, param set. You can also do like with and without query filters, if that works. Yeah, so observers are not parallelizable. They are like serialized and recursive. I don't know if the future is going to be a world where observers are more parallel or not. I don't have the answer to that. That one's not going to work. Tried to take the wrapper off a Jolly Rancher. It wouldn't unwrap. I think that there's discussions right now about an observer internals rewrite. I think that that's come, like, as we've seen people use a bunch of stuff, there have been people who worked on observers who are like, ah, yes, it would be nice if they all worked like this, and then we could do these other things. So not to say that observers don't grow in functionality in the future. But yeah, currently, if you want that kind of like batching processing or anything, you don't use observers. So, new game, destroy asteroid, win game. Let's do... I don't know how I want to do the randomness here. I'm just running through a bunch of options in my head right now. Basically, there's just using rand straight up. There's using Bevy rand on top of it, something like that. There is, we could have something really silly, like every time we do a new level, we create a like mesh of points and select from those points. We can do a uniform or like a distribution on all of those points. Kind of prevent some crossover and stuff. I think all in all, it mostly doesn't matter. I think we'll probably just use rand. But the one thing we do have to be careful of is rand currently is kind of in a weird state. I think it'll happen if I just do a cargo install rand or cargo add rand. Right. 0.9 is going to behave a little bit weird. There's a lot of like, I don't know how best to frame this. There's a lot of weird get random /wasm related stuff happening in the background that is kind of making using things like rand and other random crates more annoying than it has to be at the moment. Random but somewhat uniformly distributed among the space. Yeah. I mean, we could go full like Voronoi, you know, and place everything. I don't think that's worth it for this particular workshop. Bevy rand is out right now. We could just use it. But thinking forward to like 0.17, the fewer crates we rely on for this workshop, the easier they will be to update. So unless it's a Bevy rand related workshop, intended to teach like seedable randomness, then I think maybe we don't do that. Kind of wild that installing Rand requires everything to rebuild. That's got to be because we had 0.8 before and it upgraded us to 0.9. That's not fun. Our lock file will already be updated, so I can't even check. But I think that's what happened. It's interesting because we're basically like viewing the dependency graph of what happens when you change something right before all the Bevy crates that Bevy relies on. And then all of these other crates trigger. And then Bevy transform interpolation, and then avian 2D. So it's basically like avian depends on all of this stuff and transform interpolation, etc. It doesn't do anything by default. I think that the APIs change is one of my concerns. So if this is a workshop and we're working with 0.9 and there's uncertainty about 0.9, because like technically this is all you need, right? So if we just toss this in here, seems fine actually. I don't know why I thought there was like a hard issue currently. Maybe things have changed. Oh, you know what actually? I bet you it's web related. I bet you it breaks for web. Also, Bevy CLI alpha is out for anybody that hasn't done the Bevy CLI install yet. Bevy CLI is really, really, really solid. Yeah, there we go. That's it. 0.9 for Rand breaks web by default. And then you have to get into like setting a bunch of WASM.js flags and stuff. Yes. You mean the current? The current? Yes. The asteroid currently does spawn in the same place with the same velocity every game. That's what we're gonna fix here. Because the next thing that I want to do is split the asteroid into multiple asteroids, which is what we started doing earlier in the stream. And then when we split them into multiple asteroids, we have to pick directions for them to go, right? And I want to basically take the velocity of the original asteroid and like add it in different ways to the directions that we want to go. So that if the asteroid is going like this way and you destroy it, then you get kind of like a slow moving one that goes this way a little bit, and these two go a little bit faster out in the other directions. So 0.85 is what we are at. Oh, right. They get rid of thread RNG in 0.5 to whatever. As always. Can we not gen for a Vec 2? We should be able to. Oh, the other problem is that that's going to be... This isn't 0 to 1. This is 0 to 547 bajillion thousand. I always make that mistake with Rand. Come on, Bevy web compilation. You mean the Rand. Is it a knit with the same seed? Is the generator shared with other libs? It is not a knit with the seed at all. There is no... Our randomness here is just randomness. Regular randomness, no speciality and all. It's not seeded, etc. There is a crate specifically that people seem to be using called Bevy Rand, which does a whole bunch of that extra stuff and makes it easier to seed randomness. It's a little bit more complicated to use. And thinking about future workshop updates. So not reproducible. This should be... Oh, you mean current implementation? Yeah, Bevy Rand would be reproducible and seedable. But the current way we're doing this is not. That's right. Are you saying you want it to be? Bevy run web, because that's what I wanted to see. Yeah, I cut seedable randomness from the scope of the workshop effectively, is what has happened here. Isn't there a Rand feature for Glam? Yes. I want to say yes. Distribution for all glam types. I don't know what the distributions are, though. Like if you do a Vec2, do you get any F32 or do you get a value from 0 to 1 or -1 to 1 or I don't know the answer. Nope. Let's see. Where's F32? I think is where these live. Vec2. Impel Rand. Right. These don't help me at all. So yeah, really my question is I don't actually have any idea what those numbers would be. So we could throw glam in here. I don't know what version we currently have. Zero 29.3. This is another thing too. It feels not super useful to get into, like, yes, glam does do this, but it says we have 0.29.3. Why is that giving me an error? Features. This is like, yeah. I don't know. It's like, how do I say this? It's not really a why. That's the other thing too, right? Like you change anything in glam or anything that Bevy depends on and everything rebuilds. That's really annoying. I feel like this happens more recently than it used to. Maybe I'm just wrong. I did end up switching my Rust Analyzer target directory though. I now have an analyzer folder inside of target. So they don't collide anymore, which is nice. Like I get why Rand isn't enabled by default in glam, but unfortunately free triggers a lot of compilation. You think since you upgraded to 1.8.5 things are slower? LSP compile times, etc. It's possible. I don't know. I feel like I'm especially sensitive to it right now because we spent the stream on Saturday basically recompiling sub-second all the time. which is the opposite of the value proposition of subsecond, hilariously. But it is just experimental, so can't expect too much of it just yet. It does feel like there's something about the way this is compiling that has changed over the last couple weeks and short-term months. Because I feel like my compiles used to happen significantly faster, and for some reason things have slowed down in general, and I'm not sure why at the moment. Ta-da! Asteroids. Um, like I thought that should work, but I guess it doesn't. Oh, that's why they made that change. That makes so much more sense. Okay. Sorry, I was ignoring the compiler, but gen is now a reserved keyword. So unfortunately, rng.gen means you do have to use it with rhash. I do think this is going to not be 0 to 1 values, though. But maybe it will be. It is. It looks like, anyway. Not negative either. Just 0 to 1. So pretty much always like standard distribution, like peaking in the middle, which is fine. I think that's totally valid. Makes it a little bit awkward. I guess we didn't do any direction or anything, so it's fine. We still need like a direction later. So if this is a 0 to 1 value, and I want a I guess 0 to 2 pi. Um, What is the constant for 2 pi that exists? It's not 2 pi. It's not. You just do tau. 2. Yeah, tau. I'm trying to get the angle or the direction to put this in. What do we have? From angle? We've got velocity, which is a magnitude in 2 directions and an angle. Gen is a keyword. Yeah, exactly. Like generator. Reserved as part of gen blocks is what that is. I think it's 2024. Yeah. Yeah. Keyword idents 2024. So if you're using Rust 2024, then gen is a keyword. Which is like, what, Rust 1.86 plus, I think? 1.88, 1.8 something plus, 1.880 plus, I don't know. I forget which, 1.85 plus. So the questionnaire then is like, I feel like the magnitude needs to be higher because otherwise this like doesn't go anywhere ever. I feel like this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. If you have a vector with the magnitude that you want, right? Because if we just have velocity, how fast is this moving? Oh, it is moving that freaking slow. Okay, never mind. I think I'm doing everything right. I think I just was remembering the earlier code. Get hit. I think that's fine. I don't love this code. Maybe I'll come back and revisit it, but It's fine. And then transform kind of also need two different things here. Did we set a size for the canvas? I forget. Canvas size. Are we using this? Viewport width. We are. So it's 80. And it's fixed horizontal, which means the variable vertical, which is annoying. Because then this requires doing like viewport to world 2D stuff. Because originally I was going to just use the velocity itself, is why that was a Vec2. The other thing is, if I do a Vec2 here, I don't think we get 0 to 1. But maybe we do. It's kind of like once we start working with randomness and generating, if we generate an F32, why would it do anything but generate like an infinite amount of numbers, right? Like I get 0 to 1 as a convention, right? But you kind of just have to know that F32 gen turns into 0 to 1. And I was hoping actually to be able to do this in one generation. But doing the generation on Vec2 also goes 0 to 1. And it does 0 to 1 in a standard distribution. So you mostly end up with like 0.5-ish. So when you're doing the gen on Vec2, you get 0 to 1 positive for X and Y. And then the math gets a little bit weird because then it's like, what do you do with that value? That value is almost always basically 0. Like if you do minus 0.5 or something, right? Then that number is basically always 0 via the standard distribution, which is really weird. Yeah, that's all that is. I think revisiting this might be useful, but at least in this case, we have like, here's 360 degrees in radians. And we turn that into a Vec2 and we multiply it by the magnitude. Like those things are fine. This needs to be the viewport stuff, which is annoying. It's one of the reasons that I was like hesitating on doing the viewport stuff when we did this the other stream. But it is the correct way to do it, so it's fine. I think the viewport to world 2D stuff is like a useful API in general to talk about. Should name this left top and right bottom because they're XYs, but so this is going to be rng.gen rgen I guess F32 times how do I take the range and pick the value out of it? Because if I remember correctly, this is going to be negative positive. So it's like negative 40, positive 40. And we need to pick like 50% of that value. So we could add it together, multiply, and then cut it back in half. Just feels awkward. I feel like there's a better way to do that. We have lerp, right? So like, where does this lerp come from? Generated from float.rs.terra template. Edit the template, not the general file. Ah, this is in Glam. Perfect. So lerp and the gen is over there. So this is going to be bottom right dot y dot lerp top left dot y rng dot r hash gen, right? And this is going to be x because that's how that's supposed to be. And the question is, these should probably be reversed here too, which is also awkward. So we end up with a transform left to right and bottom to top. I think those are the right negative positive values. Perfect. That spawns over there. This spawns over here. We can do this in a kind of fun way. Let's see, where's command? I guess we can't do it as easily as I wanted to, now that I think about it. Because spawn asteroid takes in the velocity that we give it and the other thing. So I think we have a simple way to do this though. Spawn level. I am going to add systems. This is going to be a little debug system. Add systems, update, spawn dot run if input just pressed key code space. Fn spawn, mute commands, commands.trigger spawn level. This will just keep spawning for us. Let's make it spawn like 4 of them at a time, I guess. So we kind of get some stuff. Definitely an issue that they all move in the same direction. right? This needs to happen in the loop. And now we get a bunch of asteroids that are just spawning in random directions. A lot of them are pretty slow. I think we want a minimum linear velocity magnitude. Lerp the vector directly, yeah. Very circular asteroids, yes. I mean, we could do non-circular asteroids, but then we have to do non-circular colliders. Or I guess we don't have to do non-circular colliders, but like, I want the colliders to line up with the thing that we have. I also don't necessarily want this to be the same, Xavier. So we could RNG gen that, I guess. Is the F32 behavior and the Vec2 behavior the same? Not really. I actually don't know if RNG gen is the F32 standard distribution. Looks like it. I feel like using a standard distribution is weird. Because, like, yeah, sure, you get a bunch of, like, 0.5-ish values most of the time. But then you also get, like, literal 0 and literal 100. And I don't know that you really want that. So, some thought could be put into these random values. I think the randomness in general is going to get rewritten anyway. I'm not going to leave it like this. My main concern was making sure that rand didn't mess with everything else. Because as we saw when we tried to run the web stuff, one of the things that I want for this new set of workshops is for Bevy run web to work, which means that we have to use a certain version of rand. I think this is fine. It's not the best. It's not really the way that like it probably should be. Maybe it's a little too like some of them move a little bit too slow, whatever. I don't think it really matters all that much. Let's do we also need to flip the directions here, I think. I think you need to have low to high. So I think I do have to do the individual axes, or I have to do extra like min max. So something worth looking into later, see if we can find like a very clean API to just run it. But because of the way these values are set up, I think we have to flip them anyway. Because I don't think that this works out. Maybe it does. That was actually really funny. So I'm going to leave that for now. We'll fix it later. Where's our asteroid destruction department? Let's get rid of this little debug thing that I had here. Observe asteroid collision, hit asteroid, split and despawn. So we have a number of fragments that we need to spawn now. Back to the original reason that we had the command in the first place, right? What is our spawn level asteroids? Spawn level asteroids is basically doing the same thing we need to do again. So instead of spawn level asteroids, this could be spawn. We could generalize this and use it for everything. Right? Because every time we destroy an asteroid, we want to spawn some more of them. We want to do it fairly randomly. I guess we don't want to choose the spots on the screen the same. We're just going to use the same transform, so maybe it's not. Feels weird to have the spawning, like the randomness logic happen twice. Linear velocity will get added a little differently. So maybe it is a duplicate, honestly. We probably don't need window here, now that I think about it. So in spawn, or observe, whatever we called it, observe asteroid collision. For underscore and 0 ... num asteroids to spawn. Then we do some randomness stuff. We already have a linear velocity for the asteroid, so maybe we add that here. Really, we need the transform more than anything else. Which is literally just going to get cloned. We could push them all in slightly the direction that we're supposed to be going in. Right? So we could do like let mute new transform equal transform dot clone new transform dot translation this is going to be some distance. How far do we actually want to push this? It's going to be 0 to 1, so it's going to be I don't know, let's pick an arbitrary number. Right, 20 in that direction. Plus equal offset distance dot x, new transform dot translation dot y. Plus equals offset distance dot y. And then it would be cool to add the velocity of the original asteroid. Boing. Asteroid size is a match on asteroid.size, right? Medium is going to be small. Large is going to be medium. And where were we? If there's no asteroids to spawn, then this should never get reached. So we're just going to put unreachable there. And there's our asteroids. And there's our ship dying. Asteroids don't spawn more. Cool. And then at some point there's none left, right? These sizes are a little bit weird, but that's okay. I missed. That's what I get for not wrapping the bullets. Eeh. Come on. Losing at my own asteroids game. There we go. And then if you hit it with your ship, it also explodes, which is cool. So now we basically have, what else is left? We have technically like scorekeeping and stuff, but I don't think I'm going to include scorekeeping. A display of the number of lives you have left could be one, as well as like starting level 2 effectively, right? So to determine whether we are at the end of a level or not, basically if there are no asteroids available, you level up. We could just check that every frame. We could potentially check that in an observer, right? If there's one asteroid left and we're destroying it, then the level's over. I feel a little bit like checking every frame would be better. Right, check end level. So the level is constantly being checked for whether it should be like the next level or not. And then this is check end level. This queries for asteroids. If query dot, what do we have on this? Do we have size or count on this? Single. We have to iter to count. Do we have a way to do the count without iterating? Single populated. I guess we could do populated. Right, option populated. System won't run in that case. We do need the option around it if we do that. I think that the option would work. So we could do and asteroid. If query dot is sum, commands dot trigger spawn level. Spawn level. We don't keep track of the level right now, do we? Probably should. So this probably doesn't need a level in it, right? Spawn level. Because this will be like spawn level plus equals 1. And this will be spawn level res mute current level. Which doesn't exist, so struct current level. Derive resource on this. We can do .0 here. Commands need to be here too. Mute commands. Commands. This needs to be mute. So check end level queries for option populated asteroids. So if this is populated, then this is some. If it's not, then it's none, I think is the answer there. We're trying to get this to run regardless of if this is true or not, so that we can check to see whether that's none or not. Spawn level is the current level, which will start out with 0. Maybe we'll start out with 1. Imp will default on it for 1. Right? Because the default for an F-32 is 0. So this is 1. And then we need to insert this, or knit this. Init level, or init resource current level, which will set us to 1. Check end level has a problem for some reason. Oh, because I didn't do... Right. And then spawn level. Oh, that's not good. Does that not work? Unknown field, no 0 on spawn level, that's fine. This needs to be spawn or current level. So here will be a current level, resource, current level. No longer need the trigger. We have an issue with this. This might be the populated issue. I thought we could do option around populated, but one thing that did happen in what will effectively be 0.17 is that option and result got generic implementations for system param. And before that, it was specifically implemented for some things. So I don't even think we have option populated, actually. I think that's actually the issue. When was single added? Single was added in 0.15, I want to say. Right? There was always like dot single on query. And then 14 is not going to have it. Yeah. So there was always dot single on query. So you always had the behavior going back many, many versions. But single is pretty great. So we can't do sum around populated, unfortunately. Or we can't do option around populated. That is true, but a single representing it is more ergonomic. Glad to see it. Yeah, people like it, for sure. Much like query is empty, the worst case runtime, let's go check is empty. Returns crew if there are no empty. This is the equivalent of self iter next is none. Okay, so self iter next is none. So it's one tick. Worst case runtime will be ON, where N is the number of potential matches. I think that's fine for us, but I wish there was an easier way to check that. I think you can do option, but it still needs to be inside of query. Is that true? Did I just mess that up? No, because single. Yeah, this is the replacement for query. I don't think populated is a filter. Maybe it is a filter. Is it a filter? Query filter. Nope. This is a replacement for query. Five seconds in and I'm discovering new stuff. Good stuff. Sweet. Glad you landed with whatchamacallit. Glad you landed at the right time. Query option my component is not the same thing. Query option my component is a different query. Query option my component is actually a query for every entity that does or doesn't have a component. So you'll get every entity in that query, and they will all have, or most of them will have none, and then like the asteroids will have some. So compared to populated, populated is, are there any entities with this component on it? And that's really what I'm looking for. And I think that Like is empty apparently goes over everything. Returns true if there are no query items, and it says it's equivalent to self iter next is none. So the worst case runtime will be ON, where N is the number of potential matches. That feels weird. I guess it has to collect them all when you do the iter, right? That's what it, like the iter is the cost, it's not the next. Like the cost won't matter for us all that much. But I would, if there was a better option, like to use the better option. Many par iter related single. Yeah, I don't think we have a better option. I think this is our option. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Query. Why are there two randomly floating asteroids that aren't? And this does 4 of them. Oh, because this needs to run only when we're playing. Run if in state app state playing. And now we get our single. No, I actually have to play the game. No. Damn. Okay, just make games, okay? I didn't say I was any good at them. There we go. And now we get 2. Perfect. It is a little bit awkward to get like low velocity values for these. But we can always change the randomness, right? That could be a pretty reasonable thing to let people do on their own, you know? Like, oh, you want the asteroids to behave in a different way when they spawn in? Okay, we'll go modify the randomness. That seems pretty reasonable. Oh, you know what I don't like though? Actually, I don't know if I like it. It's kind of fun to just see your ship slowly float off screen. But we aren't doing state scoped on these other ones, are we? Did I remove that? Did I remove that from the asteroids? Asteroids. Spawn asteroid. Yada, yada, yada. Where is struct asteroid? Doesn't have state scoped on it. Needs to. Oh, sick. Why is that an issue? Oh no. There we go. That works. When in doubt, turbofish. And now I need to run my ship into 3 of these asteroids. We Okay, so we should have at least just one asteroid, right? There we go. Perfect. Let's get rid of that info log. Then we're good. So I think this is asteroids, more or less. Why? I think this is like pretty close to as much stuff as we're going to put in asteroids for this case. It's meant to be fairly introductory. It does use avian. It does introduce gizmos. I think those are the goals of this workshop. It's pretty important to have very specific goals like that for these, because otherwise you can end up just kind of building arbitrary features for no real reason. That was interesting. Did I shoot that one? We don't reset the lives when we reset the levels either. Where's our life count? Mute lives, res mute lives. Let's do lives equals 3. That wasn't endgame, was it? This is the wrong place to put that logic. I don't know why I put it here. Not thinking. Losing my train of thought is a great sign that the stream is going too long. Start level or spawn level is where we have this, right? Spawn ship, start game. Start game triggers a couple of things. And I think that anytime we start a game, we're going to set lives to 0. I'm hearing my own voice in my head saying, yeah, you should write a test for this, because then you wouldn't need to play it to completion every time. Okay, cool. There's that. Whack the ship into one of them. Whack the ship into the other one. Get hit. And we new game it. And we end up with an extra there because we aren't resetting the level. We also need to do mute current level. Current level. And these can all be default rather than whatever. We didn't put default on lives, but we could, right? So we end up with lives and current level that we need to default. We trigger spawn ship, we trigger spawn level, game starts. And then up here we do lives 3, but we should just do lives. And this will be lives. And this will be init, not insert. And it uses that default value that we created. And then everything's good. Let's see. We've got ship spawn, start game, end game, asteroids splitting. We're not doing points currently. We're not doing a lives display. We could do a life display. I feel like we should do a life display. If only because I don't know. I go back and forth on it because specifically people skip UI stuff when they go through these workshops. And I don't want to include anything that people are just going to skip. I think I'll have a separate set of UI workshops and stuff. And that will be very simple. That'll be like, here's a resource with a value. How do you display that value in a UI? So if somebody wants to do UI for the asteroid stuff, they can. Otherwise, I think this is pretty good as far as all this stuff goes. It's a little bit of an introduction into some avian concepts. It's a little bit of an introduction into gizmos. It has like, I think this is a particularly good one because it has that like, ray tracing is the wrong word, but the laser vibe. I forget what the screen that original Asteroids was called. The vector graphics vibe. And otherwise, everything's pretty good. We could do more stuff. There's so much stuff we could do. Like we could do particles. Particles would be cool. We could do a space background. That could be cool. But I think that for the most part, this is enough. If people want to do shaders for background stuff, that's a different workshop. If people want to do high scores, I think that might be a different workshop, etc. Like high score stuff is basically UI work, and like tracking a score in a resource. And tracking a score in a resource is something that almost doesn't need to be taught. But yeah, anyway, I think I'm pretty happy with this overall. I think this is going to be it. I'll probably clean it up a little bit. This is a 600 line workshop right now. Let's see, what do we have here for like concepts? We end up with custom commands, avian collision layers, avian collision observers, wrapping movement, I guess we'll call it. Rand generation, observers, global and local observers, resources, start from the bottom down here. Gizmos, obviously a big one. I don't think we do gizmos that aren't assets. We lerpin. We lerpin. The input stuff is pretty regular. We do have a timer. Observer, custom command. Observer. Impl blocks, I guess that's more of a language thing. We did decide to use required components. So there's a very little bit of math in here. I'm going to try to make sure that that is either as clean as possible or explained as well as possible for people. And then I think that's pretty much it. Defaults, orthographic scaling. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So this is the set of stuff. Custom commands, required components, resources, global, local observers, gizmos, timers are kind of like the Bevy set of stuff. Random numbers, avian, collision layers, and collision observers. And then we do things like impl blocks, default impls and stuff. Run conditions, technically. Although most of it doesn't matter. And we also do use states too. So a pretty hefty chunk of concepts, honestly, that we ended up with. But it all works. And if anybody wanted to use sprites, they could, right? Like this is all done with gizmos currently, but it doesn't need to be gizmos. And because we've done it all with assets, changing it out for sprites, if you wanted to go get Kenny's assets or whatever, then that would all work. Do I still have that bug? Yeah. Did I change the default value for lives? Should be 3. It is only 1 currently. Hey, your videos are very appreciated. Fell in love with Bevy despite its obvious drawbacks when compared to more mainstream engines, but I believe we can do great things with it. And Bevy can only get better. So thanks for your educational streams. Nice. I'm glad you're enjoying them. Yeah, I think when I think about Bevy, I think about Bevy on like a 5-year timeline. So I think if I were going to, let's say, ship a game to a console within the next 2 years, I might not use Bevy. But I think that like the 5 to 10 year like game development timeline, I'm going to be very happy with Bevy over that time period. And in the meantime, I can help other people who want to do it. I think it also like there's something to be said for growing with a project as well. So even if you're not using Bevy right now to like ship a game to a console or to like do the thing you're trying to do, getting involved with Bevy as big decisions are being made along the way gives you insight into why those decisions were made. And because Bevy does so much stuff out in the open, you can go back and read through all the PRs for the things that you're interested in and figure out why things are the way they are and what could be done in the future. And I think that growing with a project like that puts you on a very different trajectory compared to, I don't know, let's say you were starting Unity like today, right? You don't know that much about Unity in general, right? Like not you specifically, but like you, the person who would be starting with Unity today, has to learn everything from tutorials and stuff. You don't really get access to the engine. You don't know how things are implemented. So it kind of holds you back a little bit in that way. And I think the long-term trajectory of that learning process is greatly accelerated if you hang on to something like Bevy that is doing that. In the meantime, what did I do for... Oh, you know what? I did .0. That's why. I'm setting this to like the default for an F32. I am just driving my ship into asteroids over and over. Why do you ask? Yeah, we're good. Perfect. I kind of want to reset current level like that as well. Because we could also do current level 7. And we get level 7. It's a little unfair because you can spawn on the asteroids, but, you know, it's a learning process. Cool. I think that's going to be it for today. 3-hour stream. We finished Asteroids, so we need to come up with a different game to do next time. I'm going to spend some time refactoring Asteroids, turning it into a thing that can be like scripted and developed into a full workshop rather than just being like a code example. And it'll go on the stack with the other stuff that we're doing. I guess we're also drawing custom triangles here, right? It's a little bit interesting. I don't know if I should put that in the list of stuff. But we need to pick a new game. I don't know. I'm 50-50 on going for something a little bit more complicated and breaking it down. So something a little bit more maybe like a Pokemon clone where we can do a bunch of different states and scenes and stuff. That would require a decent amount of external crates. I don't know. TBD. We could also do like something a little bit more like flash gamey, like a slime soccer or a mini golf or something like that. I have a giant list. So if you're watching this stream at the end, either today or in the future, and you have an idea for the next game, feel free to leave it in a comment and I'll read it and take it into consideration. I think that a lot of these are going to show up as workshops on Rust Adventure. So we're at something like six of them or something right now. That's this week in Bevy stuff. I'm still a little bit behind on that. Let's see, where's the list? There's the list. This is the list right now. 2048, Blockbreaker, Snake, Minesweeper, like a Floppy Corgi or a Flappy Bird, and Asteroids. So these are all the workshops that I'm currently working on. I guess we have the lines of code here. So why don't I introduce, or why don't I put that in? Took a source, or 589, or 522 we'll call it. We'll call it the lines of code, not lines in general. So in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty simple in that respect. It is the fourth largest. 2048 and Snake ended up being larger than I thought they would be, and we've cut them back quite a bit. They used to be even bigger than they are currently. We could also start breaking off and doing some like shader workshops and stuff instead of doing full games. I don't know. Now that we have like a healthy set of them, we have like 6 of them. For 0.17, we'll have to redo a bunch of them anyway. So I don't know. TBD. But that's going to be it for the stream for today. Thanks everyone for hanging out, and I will catch you all on Saturday for the Bevy Game Jam.